Hello, and welcome to the Nashville Chapter of the National Association of Black Journalists, Crucial Conversations. Our guest today is State Representative Mike Stewart, and he represents a very diverse portion of Nashville, and I'll have him tell you a little bit about that. I'm Sandra Long-Weaver. I am a founding member of the National Association of Black Journalists and an active member in the Nashville Chapter. So I'm excited to be able to interview you today, Representative Stewart, and I'd like to just sort of go right to it and talk a little bit about what's been in the news lately and what we're seeing across the country, especially, well, mostly in the South. Confederate statues are now being toppled. In Richmond and in a few other cities in the South, they've been toppled. Other cities have gone ahead and just decided to remove them with the idea that they will still be available, not erasing history, but putting it more in context. Here in Nashville, we still have the bust of Nathan Bedford Forrest in the State House, which for a number of years, there's been a movement to try to remove that. But we've always run up against something that it's still there. And what does it represent? And so I wanted you to talk a little bit, if you could, about what may be going on to possibly remove that bust from the State House. And Forrest is known or has a reputation for being a member of the Ku Klux Klan and also part of the Confederacy, which, they seceded from the Union and lost the war. So where do we stand now?
Nathan Bedford Forrest, obviously founder, one of the founders of the KKK and a war criminal whose troops murdered a large number of soldiers at Fort Pillow, obviously has no place, should have no place of honor in the Capitol. And he was put there as a representation of segregation and to promote outdated views, and he should long since have been taken out of the Capitol. Unfortunately, there have been efforts to protect that bust that school children have to pass when they come to visit the Capitol. I will say that this week, unfortunately, Representative Staples' bill to urge the Capitol Commission to get rid of the bust, essentially a bill to get rid of the bust, failed in committee. And that was very disappointing. All the Democrats, we got a banner that said get rid of it and went up and posed in front of the statue because we wanted everybody to know as Democrats, we totally reject the idea that the statue is there. And if it weren't illegal, I think most of us like to just carry it outside and toss it on the lawn because there's no place for that. We have plenty of great Americans that could be honored. I always personally say, let's get Diane Nash, who led the sit-in movement in Nashville and has not received, I think, the due credit she deserves, along with all of the other very young people who led that movement. Right. Let's get one of the leaders of the sit-ins and get a bust and put that person up, somebody we can all be proud of. Anyway, it's not totally hopeless, though, because at the same hearing where the bill to get rid of Nathan Bedford Forrest's bust failed, London Lamar, a new member, managed to get her bill to get rid of Nathan Bedford Forrest Day, another one of these relics.
Just to insert just here, so Nathan, that day is usually celebrated July 13th.
And it's, go ahead, excuse me.
No, I just wanted to put the date in.
And it's, nobody cares about it in a positive way. It was just put there. I think it's a relic of the segregationist era. We need to get rid of it. I think I was the first legislator to file legislation to get rid of Nathan Bedford Forrest Day. I am delighted that Representative Lamar, and we've been pushing this for a long time. Representative Lamar deserves great credit. She is the first legislator that got that bill out of committee. And it represented not only her talent as a lawmaker, which is extreme, but also a changing of the view. We had some Republicans who finally decided look, this is ridiculous. Representative Dunn said, you know, if the Democrats want to clean up their segregationist past, why are we standing in the way? That was a poignant moment. He voted to move the bill out. So what I feel is, I think that the people who have come and marched and come to Legislative Plaza, they should be very hopeful because they're having an effect.
They're
Everybody's
having an
watching.
effect, but how soon will this happen? You know, it moved out of committee, but right now that day is still scheduled to be celebrated. Is that right?
It is absolutely right. And it's true that Governor Lee, unfortunately, Governor Lee and the Senate have both indicated, not the Democrats in the Senate, but the Senate as a whole, have both indicated that by passing a bill that essentially allows the day to exist without Governor Lee having to proclaim it, they've indicated they're going to allow it to continue. So I don't want to sound like I think everything is going great. It's not. But I think those of us who were in the committee that day, we felt history changing. And I believe when it starts to change, it happens fast. And we're seeing, as you pointed out, all across the country, people are saying, you know what, this is ridiculous. We need to get rid of these monuments and these statues. And I think we saw in committee that day a movement that's going to take hold quickly. I believe we're going to get rid of that bust, and we're going to get rid of that Nathan Bedford Forrest Day. I'm hopeful the next time the Capitol Commission meets, which is the group that has the power over the statues in the legislature, they all vote to get rid, to move Nathan Bedford Forrest out. It's long overdue. And I feel like people's tolerance of these monuments has come to an end.
Right. And when is the next time that that commission meets? How soon?
There's not a set meeting. They set their own meetings, but they'll be meeting, you know, certainly within the next few months. Certainly over the course of the next year, the Capitol Commission will meet, and they will have many opportunities to get rid of this bust.
I hope so. And move it to a place where it's more appropriate.
That's correct, as you said.
Yeah, but let me just ask you, so a lot of this movement around moving out Confederate monuments and busts started with the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis and the horrific nature of it. And since that day, there have been daily protests in cities around the country, including Nashville. And I wanted to ask you, how did this impact you as a state representative? What did it do?
I think it's impacted me personally in a number of ways. Mm-hmm. First of all, obviously, anybody who witnesses a murder of somebody, just watching it happen with bystanders, with people begging the person to stop, it's impossible not to be moved by that, even though we know that there have been many, many, many other incidents in our history. It's not a new problem, right. But George Floyd's murder forced everybody to just stare it in the face. And that has created this mass movement, or given rise to a large mass movement. And so we've had masses of people coming to the Capitol. And I'll tell you what I have seen is it has made me believe that many of these long overdue changes are going to occur, because when the people rise up, democracy should respond. I'll give you an example. One of the most poignant, astonishing moments that I've seen since I've been really alive, but certainly in politics, was when a group of young people came to the Capitol to protest. They asked the National Guardsmen, who were supposed to be defending the Capitol. Of course, there was nothing to defend. These protesters were completely peaceful. Right. And it was evident to everyone. They asked them to lay down their shields, and they did. So you couldn't help, if you were standing there, not to feel like you were watching history transpire, because really what the guardsmen were saying is, look, we recognize this is crazy. You're not a threat. You're making a legitimate point. And it was just Americans saying it is time to resolve these problems. So to your question, we still though have a journey. You know, we created, the Democrats, the George Floyd Act, which was a series of amendments designed based on the 8 can't wait concept of 8 different things that need to be done, such as banning chokeholds, such as not allowing firing into moving vehicles, to restructure the relationship between the police and citizens, to avoid, to create an environment in which things like the murder of George Floyd cannot occur. And right now, those were blocked on the floor. Those were put on the floor as an amendment to an existing bill, and the sponsor took the bill and put it on the desk, which means he held it.
Oh,
Now,
so there's no movement on this at all at this point?
not at the moment, but now there's going to be additional movement. There's going to be bills filed in the late bills committee to accomplish the same task. And so what Democrats are trying to do is essentially make it impossible for this to be ignored. In other words, at every juncture, we're going to try to put these issues forward, and we're going to have to just keep pushing and see where we can go with each opportunity. I do think that's how a lot of this happens. The people cry out. The more active members of the legislature that agree with them push the legislation, and it's a push and pull until we get it accomplished.
Right. And support from the community.
That's correct.
And I also wanted to ask you about, how do you feel about, there's been a call, they're saying defund police, which really means looking at other ways of distributing money and providing services to areas of cities, of states where services are needed and not reaching people. How do you feel about that? And is there any movement in the legislature to also look at that issue across Tennessee?
I will say, in all honesty, I think in the Tennessee legislature, that's mostly viewed as a local issue, and that is where, it's at the city level, typically where police departments are funded. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's at the city level that issue is being joined. For example, in Nashville, there is a current call to, restructure our priorities. I'll tell you, so I think in the legislature, the focus is not going to be on that issue. I think the focus is going to be on things like changing police procedures, making sure that police who want to be whistleblowers are protected, making sure that events are reported, having body cameras. In other words, the legislature is in charge of the criminal laws. The legislature is in charge of the laws that will ensure that a police officer who is involved in a crime, like the police officer who killed George Floyd, is brought to justice. That is within our traditional role, and I think that's where you're going to see the legislature responding. I believe that the issue of structuring how cities fund their forces is more of a local issue, but I do believe, I personally will say, it is critically important, as many activists and citizens have been saying in Nashville, to recognize that we have got to move more money into our communities, not in the form of people there to maintain control, but rather in the form of money to create an environment in which no control is needed, because children are raised with the proper environment that makes it unnecessary, that basically creates a greater, the way to have a good community is to fund the good community on the front end. And I'll give you an example. I was talking to a member of a union lately. She said to me, look, I grew up playing in all these sports leagues that used to be sponsored by Metro, okay? She said, that took up my whole childhood. That's where our money needs to be going. Our money needs to be going to all these community building activities, because that is going to create the society we want. So I'm sympathetic to that idea.
Okay, and so that person said that to you. You are starting to put together a plan to hear more of the voices from the people in your district, and what it is that they want to see from you. Can you talk a little bit more about what's coming up?
Absolutely. We're about to have an event, a community conversation just on this issue. Right now we're in the legislature, and we just, in my community. We just had one community event. Our next community event is going to be a conversation to make sure that, and it'll be Zoom, of course, because it's coronavirus, but to make sure that, one, I convey all that we're trying to do in the legislature to respond to this critical moment. And at the same time, it's a good time, I think, for us to be having a back and forth dialogue. It's always a good time to have a back and forth dialogue with the citizens, but no better time than now, when I think there is a huge historic shift occurring in our country, and policymakers have to make sure that they are keeping up with what the people want, you know, because I do think we're seeing people want they want a different approach to these problems, and they want action, and they want it to occur now. It's a reasonable demand, and so I personally intend to listen carefully.
Good. And one other thing I wanted to ask you, I know you are a veteran, and there is now a conversation about renaming forts that have been named after Confederate generals. And I don't know if you served at Fort Bragg or not, but that is one where he is mentioned as being one of the most vile, is one of the words that I heard, commanders. And I wondered how you felt as a veteran about renaming some of the forts.
I think that's fine. I mean, I think that what we're really doing is we're repairing a wrong in American history, to where a majority basically disenfranchised in 1,000 different ways another group of Americans. And it's always been a black mark on our country. You know, America has done a lot of great things. In a lot of ways, it's a great country, but it's not a perfect country. And for many Americans, it's not lived up to its promise, let's face it. And, you know, I mean, we were desegregating the schools in Tennessee in the 50s and 60s, and really 70s and 80s. I mean, we're talking about our lifetime. So that should tell you all you need to know about equality under the law in the United States of America. So sure, I think we can no longer just ignore a large, we should have our symbols, our entire country structured so that everybody is proud of what we're doing. You know, so we don't want some soldiers at a fort to feel like the very name of the fort is improper. You know, we have many, many heroes that we can honor in this country, and so let's honor ones that everybody respects, I think. So I don't have any problem with that at all as a veteran. And I did hear that the Marines and the Navy, hopefully the Army, which I served in, have all announced that the battle flag and all Confederate symbols are no longer acceptable.
Oh.
And apparently that happened this week.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that's an example of something that's long overdue, but I think the current movement of the people has created a sense of urgency in the hearts of more people, and that has led to these changes.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to thank you today, Representative Mike Stewart, for being with us at the Nashville chapter of NABJ in our crucial conversations. We appreciate you spending time with us today. Look forward to hearing more from you. And again, I'm Sandra Long-Weaver, a member of the chapter and a founding member of the National Association. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I was privileged to do it, and thank you for having me.